Welcome to the Adventist History Podcast, Season 2, Episode 27, The World at War Again, Part 2. All right. Last time we started talking about the Adventist Church during the Second World War, from the sinking of the SS Zam in the Atlantic to the evacuation of Singapore. We talked about how this was, in some ways, the greatest triumph of the Adventist organization, as the heavy church hierarchy moved quickly and effectively to safeguard missionaries, negotiate for the release of prisoners, and keep its membership well informed about what was going on around the world. Our stories took us up to about 1942, which really became the year in which things got very, very, very serious for those caught up in the war. So let's move on. General Conference President James Big Mac McElhaney gave the Sabbath sermon during the 1942 Autumn Council in Cincinnati, Ohio. Now, the council was supposed to be a meeting of the General Conference Committee, but this one was turned into a mini GC session with union treasurers, conference presidents, and evacuated missionaries all invited to attend. Now, we noted last time that missionaries were having a bit of a moment. Bruce Hunt, a Presbyterian missionary who had been imprisoned for 100 days by the Japanese, he spoke across town in Cincinnati a few days later. And the Adventist missionaries spoke on Sabbath afternoon to great acclaim. Meetings were held in the Hotel Gibson, which was almost as old as Adventism itself. Now, the Gibson was a beautiful building with 1,000 rooms, 2 courtyards, and a special kitchen just for oysters. Not that Adventists cared. But that is not where Big Mac showed up to speak on Sabbath. For the Sabbath service, the delegates and local Adventists met at the Taft Auditorium, which could seat 2,500 people. Of course, it was built and owned by the Freemasons, but let's not bring that up. Big Mac greeted the 2,000 to 3,000 Adventists who had gathered at the Taft and spoke to the moment. This is what he said. "The church is indeed to be an army thrown into battle. We must," he went on, "go forth fighting the forces of evil in the world and in our own lives. We must have victory." Now, this was in line with the General Conference's evangelistic emphasis. They wanted, in their words, to launch the greatest soul-winning effort ever undertaken by the Church of God since the fall of man. And how are they going to do that? Well, first, every pastor and every member was to get involved in evangelism. Second, they had to make use of radio to advertise. Third, lay preachers had to be trained. Fourth, an effort had to be made to reach what they called the rich and cultured classes as well as the poor and unlearned. McElhaney wanted to harness the martial mood and focus that aggression, that optimism, that desire to ride forth and conquer and use it to fuel Adventist evangelism in 1943. Now, the other side of the evangelistic coin was the need to keep members the church had already won. This is a huge concern for churches today. The Adventist Church in North America at present has lost members over the past 10 years at a rate of 35%. That is, for every 10 members that join the Adventist Church, 3.5 people leave. Now, they might be lost to death or discipline, or they just departed, but it is a demoralizing trend. Like, how excited do you expect the church to get about evangelism if you know that about a third of the people you baptize will just leave or be gone somehow? How would you feel if you put 16 gallons of gas in your car and 4 gallons or 5 gallons leaked? Now, while it's difficult to know what the turnover trend was in the 1940s, it's clear that the church was aware of this problem and wanted to fix the leak. Nevertheless, there was still plenty of good news for the church. At the end of 1941, global church membership had just crossed the 500,000 mark, and those 500,000 Adventists had built 535 schools, sanitariums, and publishing houses, all denominations' property. All of it to put together was valued at something like $65 million, which is somewhere close to about $1 billion today. Adventist publications could be found in 810 languages, and even though Adventists were in some cases decades behind other churches in shipping missionaries to China, by the Second World War, Adventists had one of the largest Protestant presences in that country. Adventist missionaries had already gone around the world. Adventist soldiers were being sent next. Now, in a war known for great humanitarian tragedies, we're going to begin with one of them. The first time the 4,000 Westerners on the island of New Britain saw bombers overhead, they knew they were in trouble because they're sitting 500 miles off the coast of Australia. And when they saw those bombers, they sent the women and the children back to Australia while the men stayed behind. Now, some moved into the jungle and planted gardens when the Japanese soldiers finally arrived. And from these hidden bases, they could rescue downed Australian pilots and others. By the end of the war, they rescued some 300 people. The Japanese, however, took 1,000 prisoners, Australian soldiers and missionaries alike, and they put them on the Montevideo Maru, which was a troop and supply ship, and sent them toward Japan. Fortunately, 8 days into that voyage, an American submarine, the Sturgeon, spotted the Montevideo Maru, confusing it with a Japanese submarine tender, which was the Rio de Janeiro Maru, and the American sub fired 4 torpedoes. 2 hit, and the Montevideo Maru sunk in like 10 minutes, killing nearly everybody on board, including several Adventist missionaries. It is the worst maritime disaster in Australian history and the greatest single loss of life during the entire war for the Aussies. Now, when news of what was happening in New Britain reached other islands in the region, missionaries began taking the last boat to Australia, right? In the Solomons, a British major commandeered 3 Adventist missionary ships, ordered them to evacuate before the Japanese arrived. One of these ships, the Portal, wasn't able to make it into the open ocean, and so the British officer set it on fire and left with 2 other ships. Now, the Christian locals on the island were horrified to see one of their beloved missionary ships ablaze, and they prayed to God to put the fire out. They cried out, "The portal belongs to God, do not burn." And unfortunately, the fire was now climbing up the mast. But in what they considered to be an absolute astonishing miracle, that fire just instantly went out. So the locals grabbed the boat, they grabbed the portal, they pushed it into a small creek where they covered it with palm branches so the Japanese wouldn't find it. But just in case the Japanese did find it, the locals dismantled the engine piece by piece, everything they could carry. Some of the pieces they wore as a necklace, other pieces they buried or hung on a tree. Now, after the war, when the missionaries returned, the locals brought out the boat, which the missionaries had thought was burned, right? The last time they saw it, it was on fire. And the missionaries were amazed. But then they saw the engine was missing, and they're like, well. Well, the locals just started laughing. They said, just wait right here. And then they just ran around, I guess, and took off their necklaces and dug up the pieces they had buried and found the pieces they hid in the palm trees. And sure enough, they got the boat working again. Now, months later on Guadalcanal, a 29-year-old Adventist named Orville Cox crawled forward under Japanese machine gun fire to bandage 2 wounded American soldiers. And he stayed with them under fire until the U.S. soldiers managed to push the Japanese back and recover them. Cox received the Silver Star. Keith Argraves was a paratrooper medic, jumping behind enemy lines without a weapon. He was eventually captured by Erwin Rommel's Africa Corps and sent to a concentration camp. When an American soldier was sent home, probably wounded, he happened to be visiting a Seventh-day Adventist home in Maryland, and he was shocked to find out that the people who owned the home were Adventist. Well, the soldier said, "I've only met one other Adventist in my entire life." And sure enough, it was a medic that he had met in the Pacific. And the unit, his unit, was about to assault a Japanese position while the officers were making sure every soldier had enough ammo, right? You got to have what you need before we launch this assault. And this Adventist, whom the returned soldier who was in Maryland, he called this Adventist Slim. Well, Slim refused to take a pistol. So Slim asked, "Can I take a stick instead?" And everyone is just like, what? Pistol or stick? Which one do I want to take in the battle, right? Everyone laughed at him, but sure, man, if you want to take a stick, you can take a stick. Whatever. I'm not going to interfere with your religious convictions if you feel called to take a stick. Well, as soon as the attack began, a trap took the lives of 4 American soldiers and wounded 4 others. 3 medics, who were armed, retreated for cover, but Slim crawled forward, presumably with his stick, taking 4 trips to rescue the men, bullets landing all around him. Well, after that returned soldier finished the story, he told the couple, "If your son is an Adventist medic like Slim, he's a good one. I'd like to meet him." Over in France, an Allied rifleman lay writhing in agony after he was hit in the neck by a fragment from a mortar that landed nearby. Struggling to breathe, a 19-year-old Adventist medic named Dwayne Kinman crawled out to the soldier, and with his jackknife, I don't want to illustrate this, with his jackknife, he performed a tracheotomy, inserting the barrel of a fountain pen into this wounded soldier's neck as a breathing tube. And then the soldier could be carried back to a tank, and the tank took him to the battalion aid station, and the surgeon who was there was absolutely shocked that Kinman managed to perform this tracheotomy on this guy's neck and use that fountain pen tube. And this episode was so famous that Kinman was offered free medical school whenever the war was over. Several universities said, hey, just come over with us, we'll put you through school for free. And then, of course, we have Desmond Doss, the most well-known Adventist from the war. He is the subject of a number of books and films. Hacksaw Ridge might have been a Hollywood blockbuster, but I went to the premiere of another documentary. This one was called The Conscientious Objector, which came out in 2004. The director gave a little talk, and then we watched the movie. And I didn't know a whole lot about Doss at the time, but I was impressed by him. And then I saw Desmond Doss walk up to the stage after the movie, this little guy wearing a Medal of Honor around his neck, and I thought, holy cow, I need to learn more about this guy. Unfortunately, Doss died a couple of years later, but his story has only grown more well-known since then. You can find that story anywhere, okay, if you want to read it for yourself, but the short version of it is this. Doss and his unit were going to be ordered up the Maeda Escarpment. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I don't know. AKA Hacksaw Ridge. That's why the movie's called that. And the goal was to assault an entrenched group of Japanese soldiers who were up there. Now, just for context, when Able Company had made it to the top, every single one of them had been killed. And Doss's Baker Company was next, and they decided to climb up in a different place and managed to keep 2 platoons up there. But when the Japanese opened fire, over 70 men were hit, and the rest climbed back down, except Desmond Doss. Earlier that morning, Doss had held up the entire attack because he insisted on reading his Bible as he always did every day. And now, he was the only one left at the top. One by one, he found the wounded men and lowered them back down to safety, while thousands of Japanese soldiers watched, taking shots at him whenever they possibly could. Doss did this over several days, lowering the last man down on Sabbath. He saved at least 75 men. No one exactly is sure how many he saved, but it's over 70 for sure. So after he lowered the last one down on Sabbath, he finally got the rest. A few weeks later, Doss was injured. Why was he injured? Well, he had to wait 5 hours until someone found him and put him on a stretcher. But as he was being carried back, he saw someone who was wounded more seriously than he was. So he rolled off the stretcher and ordered the litter bearers to take this other guy instead. Well, then a sniper shot Doss in the arm, so Doss found a rifle and tied it to his arm before crawling 300 yards to an aid station. Desmond Doss was the man, okay? Now, I've saved Doss for last because now that you've heard these other stories, I hope it puts Doss in context. He earned the Medal of Honor, but he wasn't the only Adventist hero. Doss was singled out because what he did was conspicuous, because crawling out under fire and saving a bunch of people is amazing, right? Saving 4 people is just ordinary. Saving 3 people is ordinary. So I guess saving 70-something people is just heroic, right? In the eyes of the world at that time. Plenty of Adventist soldiers and missionaries were heroes during those years, okay? Plenty of them were. Doss just saved more than everybody else, but he wasn't the only one saving people's lives, man. Adventists distinguished themselves, especially in the U.S. Army and the Australian Army and elsewhere, for their courage under fire, and they lived up to everything the church had been saying about them. Speaking of what the church had been saying about them, Carlisle B. Haynes, head of the church's War Service Commission, wanted to make sure people knew these stories, okay? Haynes filled Adventist newspapers with statements like this. On all the battlefronts of earth, Seventh-day Adventist youth are present. They are there by the thousands. They do not participate in the fighting. They destroy no lives. They cause no injury. They do not kill, but they are where the killing takes place. It has been demonstrated again and again that no element of cowardice or fear enters into the stand taken by Seventh-day Adventists. They have not shunned danger. They ask to be placed where the danger is the greatest, where the casualties of war are most numerous, in the medical department. Where fighting soldiers go, they also go. Where the fighting soldiers go armed, these go entirely unarmed. It takes courage of greater degree to go into battle unarmed. No question can arise regarding the supreme courage of the non-combatant soldier. Adventist soldiers who don't carry guns are braver than those who do? That is a bold statement. And Haynes wants some respect for what it means to be a medic. And as we have seen, I think that respect is more than earned. But there was also a strategic, even evangelistic purpose to such statements. On the home front, it was still pretty common to consider conscientious objectors, or conscientious cooperators, as Doss preferred it, as sissies. They weren't brave, they were scared, hiding behind their weird religious platitudes. They weren't in touch with the real world, right? Defend your home, defend your country. Nuance is often the first casualty in war, right? You Adventists are either fighting alongside my son or you're not. That's how people saw it. And no doubt that many Adventists were told on the street that they weren't loyal, that they weren't brave enough. Well, how do you respond to those people? Well, for starters, you can carry an armload of newspaper clippings from Carlisle B. Haynes that prove those people wrong. All right? This focus on heroism also helped Adventists untangle themselves in the public imaginations from other Christian groups with weird ways of looking at things, like the Jehovah's Witnesses. Adventists and Jehovah's Witnesses have been confused with each other since forever, much to the annoyance of both, I'm sure. But during the Second World War, Adventists felt a new urgency to disambiguate themselves from their spiritual cousins. The Witnesses, by virtue of their complete unwillingness to honor the national symbols or join the military, were in constant trouble in America, as they were in Germany, except in America they didn't have, concentration camps. 7 Jehovah's Witnesses in Pittsburgh were fired for refusing to participate in a flag-raising ceremony at the glass factory where they worked. 2 unions representing the workers said that it would be impossible to control other employees who might seek to inflict physical injury on these men or might refuse to work with them, thus paving the way for a walkout or shutdown of the plant. And this bit about not guaranteeing the safety of the witnesses was not an idle point. According to the American Civil Liberties Union, in a 5-month span in 1940, over 1,600 witnesses were subjected to some kind of discrimination or violence in 44 states. In this period of hyper-patriotism, it could be dangerous to be associated with the witnesses. So it's not hard to see why Haynes was eager to trumpet Adventist patriotism and bravery, even if the General Conference did sometimes support the rights of witnesses in court. The patriotism which Adventists felt was no doubt sincere, but it also had a purpose. Adventists also ran ads in their papers for war bonds. This, too, was carefully staged. War bonds were a way of lending money to the government, which would be repaid with a little interest in 10 years or perhaps longer. Usually longer. These World War II war bonds, actually, the last of them stopped paying interest in 2010. Now, these weren't particularly great investments. You'd be better off playing the stock market. But 2/3 of Americans bought at least one. Now, whereas secular newspapers advertised war bonds with slogans like, "Let's take Hitler to the cleaners," another advertisement urged people to buy war bonds in order to send more planes, more tanks, more ammunition to those neighborhood boys who were drafted into the armed services. Treasury Department ads in Adventist newspapers were far more sensitive. They told their readers that war bonds enabled soldiers to have shovels and pans. Knowing that most Adventists were in medical units, one advertisement even mentioned that war bonds enabled medical units to have enough hospital beds. Of course, Adventists knew that their money was being used to buy tanks and planes, and some of them were bothered by it. But, as long as they were being told that their money was going towards non-violent pieces of equipment like shovels and pans, they didn't seem to mind on the whole. After all, what kind of mother wanted their boy to go out half-dressed? In one instance, the Review reprinted an article written by the Treasury Department extolling the virtues of American government. "No country has done more for her people than ours," it said. Yeah, Adventism has come a long way from its days of calling America a land of blood and slavery. Now, Adventists fit in other ways, notably their socially conservative positions on race and gender. We'll talk about race next time. But the war was opening up a lot of opportunities for women that they hadn't had before. As fighting men headed for North Africa and the Pacific, women were replacing them in aircraft factories. The 1943 Miss America was hailed for being a factory worker. Surely this shallow business about swimsuit competitions can be behind us, newspaper editors crooned. The new American woman is a worker. Adventists weren't so sure. Not that they were big fans of swimsuit contests. The editor of the review reminded his readers that no woman can afford to sacrifice her duty to her home in order to seek a career. Rather, as wife and mother, she is queen of the home. She can find no greater career in all the world than this. Not every Adventist woman accepted this as their fate. One young Adventist wrote a letter to the church's newspaper for young adults, something called the Youth's Instructor, asking, "What future is there in denominational work for a young woman with executive ability, the talents which would qualify a man for an administrative or managerial position?" Now, this question is heartbreaking in its clarity, because the author knows that the world was increasingly valuing a woman for her talents. But would the church? Well, this woman went on. For those who aspire to be teachers or nurses or stenographers, the future is bright. But what of the others, among them some of the keenest and most richly talented Adventist young women? It seems to me that their longing to find work that will demand all that is in them is both natural and legitimate. No clear-thinking young person objects to beginning at the bottom and climbing, but it is the knowledge that the place she may reach is decided not by her ability, but by circumstances she is helpless to change that is disheartening. The answer was as predictable as it was sanctimonious. To the young woman's question of why her gender should prevent her from being a leader in the church, the reply was, "There is only one basis upon which I feel I should answer your question, and that is found in the words of 1 John 2, verses 15 to 17. Love not the world." Besides, the author said, there are just too many people in the church wanting to be leaders. Why does everybody want to be a leader? Jesus wanted us to be followers, said the author, who was, of course, a leader in the church. But none of this can throw me off the scent of something Carlisle B. Haynes said. Haynes's affirmation of the virtues of non-combatant troops is part of what sounds like a new vision for the Adventist world. In another article, Haynes wrote about Adventists serving as medical soldiers who were engaged in ministering to human welfare. That, Haynes wrote, is precisely what Seventh-day Adventists should be doing everywhere in the world. And he wasn't done there, however. He went on, "Wherever there is violence and trouble in the world, and the clamor of war and fighting arise, it is good to know that Seventh-day Adventists are serving humanity, engaged in the work which they are in the world to do. They are truly soldiers of mercy, soldiers of humanity, soldiers of Christ." That's how Haynes liked to conclude his reports about Adventist soldiers. And this is a breathtaking vision of Adventism's role in the world. Adventists are soldiers of humanity in the world? Interesting. An Adventist history textbook of these years featured a chapter called "We Serve the World." It's an idea that was, in my opinion, never fully explored. What would it look like if the church took this vision seriously? If the church was organized to be soldiers of humanity in addition to being soldiers of Christ? What would it look like if Adventists trained in diplomacy and crisis counseling would beg to be sent to the problem areas of the world to help? If the Adventist humanitarian mission rivaled that of the Red Cross? If Adventist churches were seen as safe, neutral places in gang-infested streets? John Harvey Kellogg had glimpsed the same possible future for Adventism when he was feeding and clothing and bathing and housing tens of thousands of poor Chicagoans back at the turn of the century. His own fate in the church buried that vision, only for it to arise just for a glimpse during the Second World War. But the war ended, and the vision was lost again. Part of the joy of studying Adventist history is finding these themes and threads that Adventism might have been. We tend to think that the church we have, the history we have, is the only inevitable course that we could have followed. It's the only true Adventist course, at least. Now, if we would have gotten into peacemaking and helping the poor like Kellogg wanted, we somehow would have been less Adventist. I mean, that's how we think, right? And I don't think that's true, nor are those the only two paths we might have taken. In fact, one might make a compelling case that if an Adventist hospital wouldn't have rejected a black Seventh-day Adventist patient purely for being black, we might, in fact, have ended up being more authentically Adventist. So next time, we're going to talk about Lucy Byard.